Hello, Garland Nixon here. I'm back, and Scott Ritter's here. We got lots to talk about. But before we do anything, I want to remind everybody Scott Ritter has his own site, and it's scottritterextra.com, where you'll find all of his good work. And it is very critical for all of us online, particularly for Scott in this instance, that the people who enjoy his work, the people that benefit from his work, that learn a lot, help him. Certainly, Google and Walmart and Lockheed Martin and their ilk are not going to be giving Scott Ritter any money to help expose their illegalities around the world. So we'd like for you to do it. Go to scottritter.com and make sure that you donate. Make sure you donate regularly and help Scott be able to continue with his fine works. All right, Scott. My God, man, we got a lot going on here. But let's start here. I'm going to start with politics this week, right? I'm going to start with a couple political things. Macron's been barking. Oh, we're going to take 2,000 soldiers to the Russian border and smack down the entire Russian army, right? Tony Blinken went to Paris and had a talk with Macron. I'm curious as to what the talk was about, but all we can do is speculate. I wasn't there. What are your thoughts on Tony Blinken showing up in Paris, talking to the yappy chihuahua, baguette eating chihuahua?
Well, I think we got to put Blinken's visit into a broader context. His visit came at the same time when Maria Zakharova, who's one of my favorite people of all time,
I love her,
came out, and you got to judge people not only by the quality of in her case as a spokesperson, the quality of her presentation, but the consistency of her argument. Meaning that if she was somebody like the equivalent of a White House or Secretary or State Department spokesperson, nothing they say comes true. Mm-hmm. Their predictions are all wrong because they're all predicated on lies. Look, we know what she is. She's the spokesperson of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and she's the face of Russia for many people. And so, she is a propagandist, straight up. I mean, her job is to spin things in a manner that makes Russia come out the best. She's just lucky that she's got quality material that doesn't require too much spinning. She just has to state the facts. She came out the other day and she said, no, France is pulled the trigger, and they're getting ready to put 1,500 troops into Ukraine. And that's, it matches information that's been put out by the Russian intelligence service, and information that one can, pick out from what's going on in France. I mean, as she said that, we get news from France that they have designated the unit for deployment to get it ready for deployment. And so I tend to believe that she's right, that France is getting ready to do this. Which now leads us to the next non-Blinken Macron conversation. That's a conversation, an urgent conversation initiated by the French head of the French military, calling up Shoigu for an urgent consultation. And I think they tried to cover it where he was like, hey, don't blame us, don't blame Ukraine about the Crocus City Hall attack, That was just smoke. What he was really saying is, what are you going to do when the French troops show up in Ukraine? And the answer he got is, we're going to kill you all. Every single one of you, you will die, and it will be vicious. And by the way, if you attempt to provide air cover for them out of bases that are outside of Ukraine, we're going to bomb those bases too. We're not messing around here. So now it brings us back to the Blinken-Macron meeting. I think Blinken put Macron on notice that, you'll be flying solo on this one. There won't be Article 5 protection here. We don't support this. We don't think it's a good idea. If you're thinking that you're somehow going to compel us to follow in, you take the lead, and then we, will have to have no choice but to come after you. We're telling you right now that we do have a choice, and we've made it. We're not coming after you. You're literally on your own. And by the way, the similar message is being given to all the other chihuahuas you're seeking to bring together. You know, Macron's concept is that if you take 5 chihuahuas and you put them together, you can turn them into a Rottweiler. Now, I've tried that. I bought 5 chihuahuas because I really wanted a Rottweiler, but my wife wouldn't let me get a Rottweiler. So I got 5 chihuahuas. I put them in a room, opened up the door the next day, and I had 5 yapping chihuahuas. That's all I had. They don't turn into a Rottweiler. I'm joking. I only have 1 chihuahua. But but my point is, you can't turn France, the Baltic states, and Poland into something real because they don't have the military capacity. France is supposed to be a global superpower. The best they can do at this moment is 1,500 troops. The best they can do at this moment is 1,500 troops. I just want to remind everybody listening that General Christopher Cavoli, the commander of U.S. forces, ground forces in Europe, and the commander of NATO ground forces in 2023, on the eve of the Ukrainian counteroffensive, participated in a defense forum, I believe, in Sweden, where he said the scope and scale of the violence taking place in Ukraine today was beyond the imagination of NATO. Beyond the imagination is a very important phrase, because when you're building up concepts of operations, operational planning, it's all based upon how you imagine that conflict to be. You say, we are going to have a conflict with Russia. The conflict will, unfold in this manner. We will require this many troops. We will require this much ammunition. We require this much fuel. We'll need this much logistical sustainability, this much air power, this many air-to-air missiles. And you build your entire concept of operations based upon what you imagined. So if they haven't imagined the violence taking place, they haven't imagined the casualties. They haven't imagined ammunition expenditure rates. They haven't imagined airfield attrition rates. They haven't imagined any of the things that are the reality here, which means NATO is not ready, not prepared to fight this kind of fight. That means the United States isn't ready for it. Poland's not ready for it. France isn't ready for it. Nobody in NATO is ready for it. And they have done nothing since that time to get ready for it. So all France has at this juncture is 1,500 troops. You have a situation where the Ukrainians are losing 1,000 to 1,500 troops a day on the battlefield, a day. So France, by intervening, is giving Ukraine, what, 1 day? And that's it. And NATO can't get involved because there's not enough troops to go. So I think Blinken was reading Macron, giving him a reality check and reading him the Riot Act. Now, you have to be careful about it, because one of the reasons why Macron is making the flex he is right now is that he feels abandoned by the United States. Europe feels abandoned by the United States, and he is desperately trying to create a scenario that gives France and Europe relevance. But he's operating under the illusion, because there's no way that you could articulate any kind of intervention in Ukraine without saying America will ultimately backstop us. And I think Blinken was putting him on notice that America's not going to backstop you. You're on your own on this one. And by the way, it isn't going to end well for you. We just had a news flash from a deputy undersecretary of defense. I don't know. I can't remember his name. But he's come out with a wonderful conclusion. The Pentagon has just concluded that the Russian army has completely rebuilt itself, and that it's back to being stronger than it was when this conflict started. They have everything they want for nothing. They're well trained, well led, well equipped, sustainability. And my response to him is, they were always that way, buddy. You just refuse. Now you're compelled to acknowledge reality. But basically, he's saying is that this isn't a weakened Russian military. This is a very strong, capable Russian military, and we have to take that into account. That means that the United States is taking that into account, doing the military math, and realizing that we don't have the wherewithal to stand up to Russia. And so now what we're looking for, and I think this will get into one of your questions later on, a phone call with Xi Jinping. What we're looking for is how to manage the scope and scale of the disaster that's getting ready to befall Europe. And that disaster, from a European perspective, is the strategic defeat of Ukraine, which is inevitable at this point. Everybody acknowledges it. The only question is what timeline, for this collapse, but it's happening as we speak. The Ukrainians are out of troops as we speak. So when they, what has been happening right now is that the Russians are in an attrition warfare game. And so Ukrainians will defend a piece of terrain. The Russians will attack with forces sufficient to pull the Ukrainians back, but not concentrating too much because given the lethality of modern warfare, artillery, drones take out Russians. So you don't want to give too many targets for the Ukrainians. You come and you take the terrain, and then the Ukrainians counterattack. And because Russia doesn't want to lose large number of troops, Russia withdraws. And in that process of attacking and withdrawing, Russia will achieve anywhere from a 7-1 to a 12-1 to a 20-1 casualty advantage, meaning that for every dead Russian, there's a whole bunch of dead Ukrainians. But the map, the lines on the map don't change fast. And so everybody, why is Russia taking so long to advance? Because it's attritional warfare. Their job is to kill the Ukrainians, and they're doing that. And at some point in time, the Russians attack, and the Ukrainians don't have anybody to counterattack. So the Ukrainians then fall back to the next position. And in the previous times, it took a number of iterations before Russia could make that advance. Now what's happened is every day Russia attacks and the Ukrainians pull back because there's nobody to counterattack. And each attack attrits the Ukrainians further, so they have fewer and fewer troops. And the Ukrainians are now at the point where they're saying, we don't have anybody to fall back onto. And we may have to now go to the Dnieper River line and use the river as an obstacle that allows us to redistribute our troops so we can solidify lines here in the Kharkov region and lines here in the Odessa region. That's the stage of the war we're in, which is why the French are saying, well, maybe we can send troops into Ukraine and free up some of the troops that you currently have protecting the Belarusian border, operating around Kiev. Maybe we can come into Odessa and man that last emergency line to free those troops up. And so this is the act of desperation on the part of France to free up French, because the French aren't talking about going to the front lines. They can't do it. I'm just telling you right now, again, I'm all over the map here, but history is something that you have to look at. You remember when Iraq invaded Kuwait back in August 1990? Later on, I got assigned to the CENTCOM staff, and I got to meet the defense attachés who were in Kuwait. They were held hostage for a little while, and then they were released, and they came back to the Schwarzkopf staff, where they briefed us on the reality of the Iraqi army and things of that nature. What they said is that the Kuwaiti military didn't put up that much of a fight, but that the process of advancing to the Saudi border, the Iraqis almost defeated themselves, because logistically, that's a difficult move. The logistics of moving troops in an organized fashion to retain combat cohesion is an extraordinarily difficult thing that if you don't practice it and you're not prepared for it, you end up with troops strung out all over the place, no fuel, running out of gas, arriving with no ammunition. And so when they watch the Iraqis first move up to the border, they're sitting there going, they literally just defeated themselves. That if we had a military here right now, we could counterattack and literally push them all the way back to Iraq and beyond, because they are unable to wage war right now because they're just spread out all over the place. I will come now to the French. I've studied their logistics. I've taken a look at what they've done in terms of exercises, because you're only as good as you train for. You're not better than what you train. If I go to the boxing gym, 3 times a week, and I spend an hour hitting the heavy bag, doing the speed bag, and getting 9 minutes on mitts, and then think that I can jump into the ring with Mike Tyson, that ain't going to happen, because I'm as only good as I trained. And I'm going to get in the ring, and Tyson's going to send me to the moon. That's the reality. The French right now are only as good as they train. They cannot suddenly say, we're going to carry out one of the most complex logistical sustainability operations in modern military history, and we've never trained for it. We don't even know what we're going to be doing. We're just making it up as we go along. It's doomed to fail. And this is, the other reality. The French can't do this. And I think the goal of Blinken's visit was to remind the French that they can't do it. And this is why the big French general called Shoigu. And I think he did it so that he can go back to Macron and say, we're all going to die. I'm just letting you know that, Vive la France and all that crap, French Foreign Legion, wonderful fighters. If you study the history of the French Foreign Legion, they tend to die a lot. They go to places like Dien Bien Phu, where they get massacred.
Right.
They had a famous battle in Mexico that they celebrate every year. They died. They die everywhere they fight. They die bravely. They're wonderful, heroic guys who die. And so this, Odessa may become one of those banners they put on their flag that says, we went to Odessa and we all died. And now we get to have the guys who follow in our footsteps get drunk once a year in our honor. But that's what's going to happen. And so I am hopeful that Macron has been, given a harsh dose of reality, and that the French don't go forward with this act of suicide.
I think you're right. I think the French military have voiced that they're not thrilled with this. And I think if you're a military leader, you call Shoigu and say, hey, what happens if we send some guys? I'm going to blow them to hell. All right, thanks a lot. Have a nice day. Bye. And you go back. Yeah, exactly. Kind of what I thought. And you go back to Macron and you say, this is the data that I received. I engaged with the Russian military at the highest level. Therefore, I recommend, based on that we not send them. We don't have however, you're the guy in charge. Now you've put him out on a limb. If he says send them and they get blown to hell, which they will, then when they come back to that French leader, he says, hey, I researched it and I told him and here's the documentation. Here's the day I talked to him, and he probably leaks it to the press. I told him not to do that. You know what I mean? I think it's the military leadership's way of saying, of being assured that when this thing goes bad, that they can all back the hell out of the way, point to Ukraine, point to Macron.
I've got a slightly different spin on that.
Okay.
Because what you're saying, you're talking as if France operates under normal civil military relation conventions, where the military is completely subordinate to civilian authority. But I would just like to remind people of Algiers. And the fact that the French military actually revolted against Charles de Gaulle. The Day of the Jackal was a real thing. The French military is fully capable of taking action against civilian authority when they believe that the existential survival of France is on the line. And there is talk in certain circles that there are, especially on the retired, it always starts with the retired guys. They sit there and they drink their wine and they get a little drunk, and then they start remembering back when they had muscles, and they, we would not put up with this. The French military must stand forward and defend the Republic. We have an irresponsible man. And then they invite some active duty guy, a colonel, in, and the colonel listens. The colonel goes back and talks to his general. The general sends a question back to the retired guys who meet with the business community, and they say, there is support, for this. And next thing you know, the French army revolts. And I'm not saying that that's going to happen. What I'm saying is there's the potential of that happening. And when you have the commander of the French military telling Macron, if you send French troops here, we will die, all of them. And we're going to get ourselves in a situation where, the only choice we have is nuclear weapons. And I don't know if you saw there was a retired French general who said, we have nuclear weapons. It's not just the French cities that are under, potential attack from Russians. It's Russian cities that are under potential attack from the French. And I'm like, wrong thing to say, guy, because the last time I checked, you only got 4 nuclear submarines. 2 or 3 of them are imported at any one time. The one that you have out there is so loud that the Russian attack subs are trailing it. And if I were the Russians, having heard that, the moment I heard you hiccup, I'd sink all of your subs. I'd come in and I'd blow up all of your air bases where you have nuclear capable strike aircraft. And then you've got nothing. And the Russians haven't used a nuke. I mean, the French need to understand that they aren't a superpower. They're not. They're not even a middle-sized power. Half the armies in Africa are stronger than the French army. All of the armies in Asia are stronger than the French army. They're not very good at what they do. They stopped doing large-scale ground combat when the Cold War ended. They started focusing on what they call expeditionary warfare. That is to send troops in 3,000, 5,000 strong packages to Africa to carry out post-colonial, military security domination. And they failed. They've been kicked out of the Sahel. What was it? Senegal just had an election. It's unique in that area that they didn't have a coup, but they had an election, and the new president said, "Au revoir, get out of here. We're done with you. Hey, Russia, you're looking pretty good." And I think that's another thing that Macron has to deal with here is the embarrassment of losing Africa to Russia, because you look at Mali. Forget all the crap. Excuse my language. All the stuff you hear about, war crimes and slaughterings. The Mali army today is asserting, government control over parts of Mali that they haven't had control of in a long time. And that's because the French, when they were there, Mali and Niger have this, very porous border, and the French have these uranium mines in the northern part of Niger, and they cut a deal with the rebels to not interfere with the mining of uranium in exchange that France will keep their respective Niger and Malian armies out of this area. So they ceded huge swaths of sovereign territory to rebel. France did this without consulting the government of Mali, the government of Niger. Understand why they might say, we don't want France here anymore. They kicked them out. Wagner came in Mali, and they are recapturing these cities, these towns. They're wiping these guys out. Niger's saying, we like some of that Wagner medicine. We want to pop some of those Wagner pills. So Wagner's now starting to work with the Niger government when they'll do the same thing. Burkina Faso is going a step further. They're saying, Wagner, yes, but da to the Russian military too. We want them in play. And so now Russia's in West Africa, and now Senegal's going, not Senegal, I'm sorry. Yeah, the Senegal.
Yeah, Senegal. Yeah,
Senegal's going.
Young guy won. Yeah.
Я тоже хочу русский солдат. I also want some Russian soldiers, baby. And France is gone, finished. And it's you're going to see this. They've lost Africa to the Russians. And from the American perspective, we've been relying on this French foundation, and it's gone. And so we've lost Africa to the Russians. And there's a lot of panic going on about this, because this is a big, big deal in terms of global, geopolitics and, the whole concept of multipolarity. We were sort of hoping that we'd have an element of Africa on our side in this multipolar world, lost it to the Russians. And so Macron has a lot of bitterness. And so he's thinking, how do I offset the loss of Africa? I can do that by costing Russia Odessa. And Odessa is important because Odessa, as long as it remains in Ukrainian hands, that means that NATO has access to Odessa via proxy, which means they will always be able to threaten Crimea, the Black Sea Fleet, et cetera. It's strategically untenable for the Russians. So, while Putin has not said, I'm taking Odessa, he's taking Odessa. This war will not end without Odessa, because Russia cannot tolerate that. And Macron is making a gamble that, I can cost him Odessa. That'll be the strategic defeat of Russia. But even if France had 150,000 troops to send, they can't. The Russians wouldn't allow it. This is an existential question for Russia. And, so I think Macron is going to just have to swallow some very hard medicine here and take a step back, because I do believe if he goes into Ukraine that the defeat will be absolute, and that the consequences could be dire. And no matter what you think about NATO and Europe and all that stuff, ladies and gentlemen, we don't want the French army to launch a coup d'etat on France. We don't want that. And so the best thing to do is, prevent a potential scenario that has that as a possible outcome. And so I think, again, coming back to your first question, that's why Blinken went to meet with Macron, is to lay all of that out on the line.
There is a speed bump on the front. There is a speed bump on the front.